the air grows thin in the high latitudes, and beneath the drifting ice of forgotten ages, there may lie stories far older than any we have been taught. Our planet is ancient beyond comprehension, yet every fragment of bone, every shard of stone, every trace buried under glacial silence suggests that we know only a fraction of what has lived and died upon this earth. Myths speak of vanished worlds swallowed by oceans and fire. Legends whisper of cities erased from memory, their towers hidden under permafrost or drowned beneath shifting seas. What if the poles themselves, the frozen edges of the earth, conceal evidence of a society so primeval, so far removed from recorded history, that it could change how we understand ourselves forever? Before we follow these echoes into shadow, a small request. If you find yourself drawn to the mysteries of humanity's earliest journeys and the riddles that time has hidden in stone, share this voyage with others by subscribing, liking, and leaving your own thoughts below. In doing so, you help keep alive the collective search for origins too vast for one voice to hold alone. The wind moves endlessly across the tundra, carrying with it the taste of salt from distant seas and the dry sting of powdered ice. It whispers across barren plains where little breaks the horizon, save for the looming silhouettes of glaciers that seem eternal in their frozen dominion. The silence here is overwhelming, not the gentle quiet of a meadow or forest, but a heavy stillness that presses down upon all who wander into its grasp. It is the silence of time itself, stretching unbroken for thousands of years, a silence carved into the bones of Earth's coldest places. Yet beneath that stillness, preserved within the ice and the stone, is a record of life, of struggle, of death, of survival, and of stories far older than our memories can reach. Long before cities rose, before words were written on clay or parchment, small bands of humans moved like shadows across this unforgiving expanse. They followed the herds of mammoth and reindeer, their every step dictated by hunger and the shifting seasons. Their footprints vanished in the snow as quickly as they appeared, yet the evidence of their presence lingers still. A flint blade, chipped to an edge sharper than any claw. A fragment of ochre-stained bone, etched with markings that suggest meaning beyond mere function. A circle of stones blackened by ancient fire, preserved in frozen soil where flames once flickered against the long night. Each artifact is a voice calling out across the abyss of time, reminding us that even here, on the very margins of existence, life found a way to persist. Imagine the world as it was in the Pleistocene. Vast ice sheets stretched across the continents, swallowing entire regions beneath their crushing weight. The air was colder, the nights longer, and survival demanded not only strength, but a kind of cunning born from desperation. The humans who ventured into these northern latitudes were not adventurers in search of glory. They were families, fragile and exposed, bound together by necessity and the unrelenting need to feed their children. They carried fire with them as a talisman against the dark, a fragile spark that held at bay the endless cold and the predators lurking just beyond the circle of light. The great beasts of that age were both enemy and salvation. Woolly mammoths, taller than any house of wood or stone, moved in slow processions across the icy plains, their shaggy coats and sweeping tusks a symbol of endurance. To hunt such a creature required bravery, verging on madness, yet the reward was immense: meat to sustain a clan, hide to bind their shelters, bone to carve into tools and weapons. The mammoth was more than prey. It was a resource that defined survival. Alongside them roamed woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions, and dire wolves, creatures whose presence must have filled the nights with both awe and dread. Every shadow on the tundra, every sound beyond the firelight, carried the weight of mortal danger. In this chapter of Earth's story, we find the earliest threads of what it means to be human, not merely to survive, but to imagine, to record, to pass meaning from one generation to the next. Consider the fragments of carved ivory found buried deep in caves, miniature figurines shaped into the forms of animals, hunters, and spirits. Were they charms to call success in the hunt? Were they memories of creatures long admired? Or were they attempts to capture something intangible, a belief that the world was not only physical, but alive with forces unseen? In the stillness of ice and stone, even a carved figure becomes a declaration that survival was not enough. There had to be meaning. The landscapes themselves carry memory. In permafrost valleys, bones lie entombed in frozen rivers of silt, preserved as though time had been stopped. A mammoth calf, curled in the fetal position, its skin still intact after 40,000 years. The jaw of a Neanderthal child, its teeth worn with the marks of a short and brutal life. These are not just remnants. They are portraits of existence paused mid-breath. The earth holds them with a kind of reluctant reverence, as if unwilling to let go of its witnesses to an age now lost. Silence is deceptive, though, for within it, we also sense the echoes of catastrophe. The advance and retreat of glaciers reshaped the land like a slow-moving tide of destruction. Valleys were gouged, rivers diverted, entire habitats erased. Species that once thrived were forced to retreat or vanish altogether. To the people who lived through these changes, the earth itself must have seemed alive and unpredictable. One generation might know fertile hunting grounds, while the next found only ice and emptiness. The silence of ice was not stillness at all, but movement too vast and slow for human eyes to perceive. What stories did these people tell as the wind howled outside their shelters? We cannot hear their voices, yet the remnants suggest an intimacy with the land we can scarcely imagine today. The grooves etched into a mammoth tusk might represent the cycles of the moon, a calendar to guide migration and hunting. The faint scratches on a cave wall, layered over with soot and pigment, could be maps or prayers, or simply the desperate act of saying, "We were here." In such gestures lies the first spark of history, not written with ink, but carved into bone and stone, preserved under layers of ice. To walk in these frozen places today is to step into that silence, to feel the weight of absence pressing down. It is not merely the absence of sound, but the absence of lives once lived with intensity and fragility. Archaeologists kneel in permafrost soil, brushing away the dirt to reveal a tool held in human hands tens of thousands of years ago. In that moment, the silence breaks. Across the gulf of time, the sharp edge of stone speaks louder than words. It tells us that humanity has always been a species of persistence, of ingenuity, of survival against odds that seemed insurmountable. And yet, the silence is also a question. What do we not yet know? What stories have been erased completely, dissolved by meltwater, ground to dust beneath glaciers, or carried away by shifting seas? We may imagine that we stand on the shoulders of all that came before, but perhaps we stand instead on ruins invisible to our eyes, buried too deep to uncover. The permafrost is both a vault and a tomb, keeping some secrets while ensuring others are lost forever. There is a strange paradox in this beginning. The very landscapes that seemed most hostile to life are the ones that preserved its memory most faithfully. In the silence of ice and stone, the voices of early humanity still murmur, faint but insistent, waiting for us to listen. They remind us that the story of survival was never straightforward, never assured. Each fire lit in the frozen dark was both a triumph and a fragile plea against the enormity of time. Here, at the frozen edge of existence, humanity began to shape itself. Each tool, each whispered story, each step across the tundra was part of a long, unbroken thread that leads directly to us. The silence of ice and stone is not only a record of what was lost, but a foundation of what endured. And as we turn from this chapter, we are left with a lingering thought. If so much has been preserved in these frozen margins, how much more lies hidden still, waiting for the day when silence will give way to revelation? Darkness was not merely the absence of light in the ancient world. It was a force unto itself, a presence that shaped every moment of life at the edges of survival. In the frozen reaches of the Pleistocene, night stretched not for hours but for weeks, pressing down on human camps like a shroud. The long winters of the high latitudes brought endless twilight, a sky barely lifting above the horizon, the sun reduced to a dim ember smoldering far away. For those who endured such nights, fire was more than warmth or protection. It was existence itself. Without it, there could be no survival, no community, no continuity of memory. Fire was the fragile center of human life, a heartbeat of flame in a universe of ice and dark. Picture the circle of hunters and families huddled close to the glow. The flames crackle and spit, sending sparks into the night air, where they vanish into a silence too vast to measure. Beyond that fragile boundary of light, wolves prowl in the snow, their eyes glowing faintly with the reflection of the fire. The breath of mammoths hangs in the cold like mist, the sound of their heavy steps carrying across the frozen ground. The people feel this vastness pressing against them, but within the circle of flame, they create something miraculous, a world of their own. Here, against endless night, they whisper stories. Here, in the glow, they dream. The importance of fire cannot be overstated. It allowed meat to be cooked, making it safer and easier to digest, fueling bodies with warmth and strength. It dried skins, hardened wooden spears, and extended the hours of work and thought into the darkness. But beyond function, fire was transformation. It turned caves into sanctuaries, plains into meeting grounds, and strangers into kin. Around it, people began to share words, gestures, and eventually myths, threads of meaning that bound generations together. The fire was a mirror in which humanity first saw itself reflected. Think of the stories that may have been born here, in those long nights when silence pressed against the camp like an endless sea. Shadows flickered across stone walls, becoming shapes of animals, spirits, and ancestors. Children listened wide-eyed as their elders spoke of beasts too large to face, of journeys across frozen rivers, of spirits that lived in the stars above. Myths were not distractions from survival. They were survival, carrying warnings, lessons, and hope. To speak of a predator was to prepare the young for its cry in the darkness. To describe the movements of the moon or stars was to prepare them for the changing of seasons. And to create spirits that walked beyond the fire was to make sense of the vastness of a world too overwhelming to face in silence. The long night was not only physical, it was emotional, psychological. Isolation could fracture the will to endure. In the endless dark, fire became a companion, a guardian, a symbol of continuity. It hummed and whispered with the rhythm of life, its crackle, a reassurance that the void could be held at bay. To watch the fire was to watch time move. To feed it was to declare an intention to see the dawn, and in its light, human faces were illuminated, eyes reflecting both fear and resilience, lips speaking words that carried across generations. Archaeological traces of this era give us glimpses of the firelit world. Hearths preserved in caves, there, layers of ash recording centuries of gatherings, charcoal mixed with ochre on cave walls, pigments glowing faintly in the flicker of torchlight as images took shape. Bison, deer, mammoth, and mysterious symbols whose meanings evade us still. These are not the marks of idle hands. They are the echoes of minds reaching beyond survival into imagination. The act of painting, of telling, of shaping stories into form was born in the firelight. It is here that culture itself began. Consider the predators that haunted the edges of the flame. The cave lion, with its massive frame and golden mane, must have been both admired and feared. Packs of dire wolves, larger and fiercer than any wolves we know today, circled human encampments, waiting for weakness. The fire kept them at bay, yet its glow also illuminated their presence, reminding humans of their vulnerability. The tension between light and dark, between safety and danger, became a rhythm that shaped the psychology of our species. Every spark that leapt into the air carried the knowledge that one misstep, one extinguished flame, could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The endurance of these nights required more than fire. It required companionship. Humans are social beings, and in the crushing darkness, isolation could unravel the spirit. But together, around the flames, they found not only comfort, but identity. Language deepened in the firelight, stories became more elaborate, and shared memory grew. What began as warnings about predators or migrations became tales of origins, spirits, and gods. The fire was the stage, the night, the backdrop, and humanity, the storyteller. It is no coincidence that so many cultures, even in later ages, revered fire as divine. From Zoroastrian temples to the hearth gods of Greece and Rome, the flame remained sacred. Its roots lie in these primal nights, when light was not a luxury, but a lifeline. The reverence was not abstract. It was a direct inheritance from ancestors who had seen the flame as the only force standing between them and the void. To worship fire was to honor survival itself. Yet the fire was also fragile. Storms could snuff it out, careless hands could let it fade, and in its absence, darkness reclaimed the world. Some groups carried embers with them on migrations, carefully wrapped in bark or bone, keeping the flame alive across vast distances. The ember was more than heat. It was continuity, a living connection to the fires of the ancestors, to the first sparks struck from stone. In every ember carried forward, we glimpse the determination of a species unwilling to surrender to silence. What did the firelit nights feel like to the children of that age? Perhaps they were filled with both terror and wonder. The shadows of animals drawn on cave walls may have seemed alive, dancing in the flicker of flame. The voices of elders, low and steady, must have woven entire worlds into the darkness, and above them, when clouds parted, the stars stretched vast and infinite, the Milky Way glowing across the sky like a trail of fire itself. To the first storytellers, those stars may have seemed like distant campfires, the homes of gods, ancestors, or watchers beyond time. In their gaze upward, we see the earliest beginnings of cosmology, of the human need to place itself in the infinite. The firelight was more than protection. It was revelation. It showed humans not only the outlines of their world, but the possibilities beyond it. Within its glow, they discovered imagination, They discovered the ability to carry ideas forward, to build upon the words of those who came before. The night was endless, but the stories made it survivable. The flame flickered, but its meaning endured. And when the night gave way, when dawn finally stretched its pale light across the snow, the fire became the bridge between two worlds, the world of darkness, of myth, of whispers, and the world of daylight, of action, of survival. Humanity existed between the two, shaped by both, carrying forward the lessons of fire into every new dawn. The firelight against endless night was not only a survival strategy, it was the birthplace of culture, of language, of myth, of hope. In its fragile glow, humanity became more than an animal. It became a storyteller, and those stories, once whispered against the darkness, continue to echo even now when we light our own fires in homes, cities, and screens, still pushing back against the eternal night that waits beyond. When the ice retreated, even for a season, rivers awoke like veins of the earth itself, surging with meltwater and carrying the detritus of ages across the land. They cut through valleys, carved canyons, and left behind beds strewn with stone, bone, and memory. These rivers were more than water. They were the living archives of a world in flux, shaping the landscape as surely as they shaped the destinies of the humans who followed their courses. Along their banks, survival took form, not in isolation, but in community, for rivers gathered not only streams, but people, animals, and stories into their ceaseless flow. It is along such rivers that we find some of the most haunting traces of human and animal life intermingled. Bones litter the ancient floodplains, mingling mammoth tusks with antlers, aurochs skulls with human remains. To walk upon these sites today is to tread on a palimpsest, each layer recording not only what was lived, but what was lost. A herd that perished in sudden flood, a clan caught in shifting ice. The traces linger, not as accidents, but as testaments to how closely tied life was to these waters, for in them lay both sustenance and death. The people who lived beside these rivers knew them as both gift and danger. The waters provided fish, their shimmering bodies flashing beneath the current, a vital source of food when hunting failed. The reeds and willows along the banks offered shelter, material for weaving, and hiding places for game. But these same waters could rise suddenly, swelling with the melt of distant glaciers, sweeping away camps, drowning entire families. The river was a god, benevolent and merciless, whose moods determined the rhythm of human survival. Bone was as important as water in this age, for it became both resource and memory. The carcasses that rivers carried and deposited were not discarded. They were treasures. A mammoth tusk could be carved into spears, needles, or even flutes that sang in the firelight. A reindeer antler could be shaped into harpoons, scrapers, and ornaments. Even human bones were sometimes repurposed, worn smooth by hands that refused to waste anything that could serve survival. In every carved edge, we see not only ingenuity, but reverence. The bone held the memory of the creature it once was, and in shaping it, people gave that life a second form. Archaeologists today have uncovered entire assemblages of such bone tools, each one etched with lines and marks that may once have carried meaning. Some believe they were tallies, counts of hunts, seasons, or lunar cycles. Others see them as art, expressions of identity or ritual. Whatever their purpose, they show that humans were not content to use bone only as a blade. They carved into it their presence, their memory, their story. The rivers of bone became rivers of thought, flowing from generation to generation. The landscapes of these floodplains also preserved entire moments frozen in time. Consider the sites where herds of mammoths trapped in mud were butchered by humans working together with precision. The bones lie still in the earth, arranged in patterns that suggest planning rather than chance. Skulls cracked to reach marrow, tusks moved aside to access flesh, spears broken and left behind. These are not merely kills, they are orchestrated hunts, evidence of coordination, of community, of shared labor. The rivers preserved these moments, embedding them in silt as though unwilling to let them be forgotten. Memory itself flowed along these waterways. Just as the river carved the land, so too did it carve human identity. Stories told in firelight often began at the water's edge, tales of the great hunt, of floods that swallowed whole valleys, of spirits that lived in the current. For people who could not read or write, memory was geographic, embedded in places and marked by bones. A particular bend in the river might be where an ancestor fell, where a great beast was killed, where a child was born. The landscape itself became a mnemonic, a living story inscribed across valleys and plains. The rivers also connected humans to their distant kin. Following the waterways, groups moved across continents, carrying with them not only their tools, but their myths. In this way, rivers became arteries of migration, channels through which culture and memory flowed. The same motifs carved into bones in Siberia appear thousands of miles away in Europe, evidence of ideas traveling with the people who traced the winding courses of rivers. Memory did not stay confined. It moved, it merged, it evolved. But rivers of bone also speak of endings. The carcasses left behind are reminders of extinction, of fragility. The great herds that once thundered across plains began to dwindle as climates shifted and as humans pressed further into their domains. The bones became more numerous than the living, a sign of abundance fading into loss. To the people of that time, such changes must have been both terrifying and incomprehensible. One generation grew up with mammoths as neighbors. The next found their bones in riverbeds, the creatures themselves vanishing from sight. Memory was forced to carry what life could no longer provide. There is something profoundly haunting about these rivers. They remind us that time is not a straight line, but a flow, carrying forward fragments of what came before while eroding what cannot last. The bones preserved in silt are like voices half drowned, calling out from beneath layers of earth. To study them today is to listen, to lean down and hear the faint echoes of lives that once filled the silence with laughter, with struggle, with story. And so, rivers of bone and memory teach us that survival is never merely about the present moment. It is about continuity, about carrying forward not only tools and genes, but meaning itself. When a bone flute was carved and played beside the fire, it was more than music. It was the voice of memory, of ancestors, of rivers that had shaped both land and people. It was a reminder that life, fragile though it was, could create beauty even in the shadow of extinction. The silence of ice had given way to the murmur of water, but that murmur carried with it a deeper truth. Everything passes, yet nothing is entirely lost. The bones lie waiting, the rivers continue their endless carving, and memory, though fragile as firelight, remains. To stand by such a river today, holding a fragment of ivory carved by hands 10,000 years gone, is to feel time collapse, to sense that we are not only heirs to survival, but inheritors of memory. And as the rivers carried bone and story forward, they also carried questions. Were these landscapes merely the stage for human endurance? Or did they once bear witness to more complex societies now erased? Did the bones speak only of the hunt? Or do they hint at ceremonies, rituals, and beliefs that we can no longer decode? The rivers of bone leave us with riddles as well as answers. And it is into these riddles that we now begin to step, as the silence of survival gives way to the whispers of something larger. A world of echoes, myths, and forgotten civilizations waiting beneath the ice and stone. The earth holds its memories unevenly. Some are preserved in the clean clarity of bone and stone, others in myths whose roots vanish into obscurity. Between the rivers of survival and the empires of recorded history lies a chasm of time, a vast expanse where echoes murmur but do not resolve into clear voices. Archaeologists uncover fragments, walls buried beneath shifting sands, anomalous carvings in caves, structures aligned with stars, but each fragment seems to point to something greater, something we cannot yet fully see. The silence of ice and the murmur of rivers may have been only preludes to ages of human complexity that have since been swept away, leaving us only whispers of civilizations erased. It begins with the anomalies, a circle of stones in the tundra where no known culture should have raised monuments. Geometries carved into rock that suggest mathematics far beyond what small bands of foragers required. Tools or ornaments made from materials that seem out of place, as though carried from distant lands by journeys longer than any we believed possible at the time. None of these alone demands that we rewrite history, but together they form a pattern, faint outlines of a world that does not fit neatly into our timeline. The myths of many peoples speak of great halls or shining cities swallowed by flood or frost. The Norse told of Jotunheim, land of giants in the north. The Greeks whispered of Hyperborea, a paradise beyond the winds where the sun never set. Siberian shamans spoke of places of origin hidden under ice. Even the oldest Sumerian tablets hint at earlier ages, kings who reigned before the flood, civilizations that vanished in catastrophe. We call them myths because we cannot place them. Yet myths have always been repositories of memory, carrying truth encoded in symbol, survival as story. Could it be that behind the legends stand fragments of reality, memories of societies erased by time's unyielding hand? Consider Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, where vast stone enclosures rise from a hill dated to nearly 12,000 years ago, far older than any city, older even than agriculture as we understood it. The site seems to tell us that humans were capable of monumental architecture, complex ritual, and symbolic thought far earlier than we expected. If such a place could exist so long ago, what else might have been lost, especially in regions where ice has hidden the ground for millennia? Could the poles, vast vaults of frozen silence, still conceal evidence of civilizations now reduced to myth? The Younger Dryas event looms as a backdrop to these questions. Whether caused by cometary impact, volcanic eruption, or sudden shifts in ocean currents, it marked a cataclysm nearly 13,000 years ago, a sudden return to glacial cold, a collapse of ecosystems, and perhaps the erasure of entire human lifeways. If humans had begun to cluster into proto-civilizations, building structures, telling myths, charting the stars, such upheaval could have scattered them like dust in wind. The survivors may have carried only stories, fragments of memory that over centuries hardened into legend. The flood myths that appear in dozens of cultures, the Epic of Gilgamesh, Noah's Ark, the deluge tales of indigenous peoples, may be the echoes of that age, a memory of waters rising, sweeping away not just lives, but whole societies. Artifacts occasionally surface that stoke such speculation. Strange maps from later centuries, like the Piri Reis chart, depicting coastlines long buried by ice, out-of-place objects whose provenance is unclear, stone alignments beneath shallow seas, their purpose ambiguous but suggestive of human design. Mainstream archaeology urges caution, reminding us that coincidences, misinterpretations, and hoaxes abound. And yet, there remains a pattern of unease, the sense that we stand upon ruins too deep to excavate, that human history is not a straight line of progress, but a tapestry with whole sections torn away. It is tempting, of course, to fill these absences with imagination. Lost continents like Atlantis or Lemuria become placeholders for our yearning to explain the gaps. Ancient astronauts, forgotten empires, civilizations destroyed by their own hubris, all serve as stories we tell when confronted with silence. But even if these speculative tales remain unproven, they arise because the silence itself invites them. The gaps in the record are so wide that they echo. And when silence echoes, humans cannot help but hear voices. One cannot stand in the shadow of megaliths without wondering who first conceived of lifting stone against the sky. One cannot trace the labyrinth of myths without feeling they converge toward a common memory, a story older than writing itself. Were there cities before the flood, before the ice reclaimed its dominion? Were there cultures whose knowledge slipped beneath the seas when coastlines shifted and continents sank? Or are these only the reflections of our own longing, our own need to believe that we are not the first to gaze upward at the stars and wonder? In this chapter of Earth's story, the line between archaeology and myth blurs. The echoes of forgotten ages call to us, not with certainty, but with suggestion. A carving of a bird-headed figure in stone. Was it god, shaman, or simply imagination? A vast chamber beneath Antarctic ice detected by radar, natural cavern or something built by hands long gone. A submerged ridge lined with stones off the coast of Japan. Geological formation or drowned temple? Each discovery feels like a message half erased, a riddle written in fragments. And so, we are left with questions. If civilizations rose before our recorded memory, why did they fall? Was it the hand of nature? Ice, flood, fire from the sky? Was it the weight of their own ambition, consuming resources until collapse? Or did they pass quietly, leaving no trace but the myths that survived on the tongues of shepherds and sailors, told and retold until meaning dissolved into legend? There is humility in acknowledging what we do not know. Our maps of history are drawn with wide strokes, but between them lie blank spaces as vast as oceans. The echoes from those spaces are faint but insistent, reminding us that silence does not mean absence, and absence does not mean nothing was there. Beneath the poles, beneath the sea, beneath layers of earth and ice, there may still lie records that will one day astonish us. Until then, we listen to the echoes. The firelit nights of Chapter 2 gave humanity voice. The rivers of Chapter 3 gave it continuity. But here, in the echoes of forgotten ages, we glimpse the fragility of memory itself, the ease with which whole worlds can be swallowed and reduced to whispers. We inherit not only what survived, but the silences where stories were erased. And in those silences, the imagination reaches outward, searching for civilizations just beyond the edge of history's light. For as long as humans have told stories, they have spoken of lands that once flourished and then vanished, swallowed by sea or buried beneath endless frost. No legend has endured more powerfully than that of Atlantis, first described by Plato as a great island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a civilization radiant with wealth and knowledge, destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe. Whether Plato drew from an older memory or invented a moral tale, His words have echoed across millennia. But the deeper we look into the silence of the poles, into the drowned coastlines of the Ice Age, the harder it becomes to dismiss such stories outright. For what we call myth often hides the shadow of memory. And perhaps, in the frozen margins of Earth, lies a truth that would change the way we understand human history. During the last Ice Age, vast amounts of the planet's water were locked into glaciers. Sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today. Coastlines extended far into what is now ocean, revealing plains and plateaus where humans may have built their homes. When the ice melted, those coasts drowned, submerging whatever lives or structures lay upon them. The world we inhabit now is not the same as the one our ancestors knew. Whole continents of possibility lie hidden beneath waves, sealed away not in the deep abyss, but in the shallow waters just beyond reach. If a civilization did rise during that time, it would have been coastal, for rivers lead to seas, and seas bind trade. And if such a civilization existed, then its ruins would not stand on dry land today. They would lie beneath the water, or under the frozen vaults of the poles. The Arctic and Antarctic alike hold riddles. Beneath the ice of Greenland, scientists have found the imprint of ancient river valleys, once lush and flowing. In Antarctica, radar reveals mountain ranges and vast subglacial lakes, landscapes concealed for millions of years. Some anomalies stir the imagination further. Geometric patterns glimpsed in satellite images, formations that appear unnaturally regular. Are they natural geology, or could they be remnants of human or pre-human design, erased beneath ice sheets that have lain undisturbed for ages? Caution tempers speculation, yet the possibility lingers. A whisper that civilization may not be as linear as we think. Legends around the world carry similar motifs. Flood myths emerge from Mesopotamia, from India, from the Americas, from Polynesia. In each, a great society is destroyed by rising waters, leaving only fragments of knowledge carried by survivors. The biblical flood of Noah mirrors the Mesopotamian story of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Hindu texts speak of Manu, saved from a great deluge. The Maya told of earlier creations washed away. These stories are not identical, yet their resonance is striking. Could they all be cultural echoes of the same event, a catastrophic flooding at the end of the Ice Age, when seas rose and lands vanished? Could Atlantis, then, be not a singular city, but a memory of many lost homelands drowned at once? Plato described Atlantis as a place of immense power and hubris, punished by the gods for its corruption. Yet if we strip away the morality tale, what remains is the image of a society advanced enough to be remembered long after it was gone. Its destruction was sudden, its memory enduring. Archaeologists remind us that no evidence yet proves Atlantis was real, and yet the yearning persists because the gaps in our record invite such speculation. It is not only the absence of proof that compels us, but the abundance of mystery. Modern science adds intrigue. Around 12,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas event reshaped the world. Temperatures plummeted, glaciers advanced, megafauna perished. Some researchers argue that a comet or fragments of an asteroid struck the Earth, unleashing firestorms and floods. Others point to volcanic eruptions or sudden changes in ocean circulation. Whatever its cause, the event was catastrophic, and it coincides with the very period when Plato placed the fall of Atlantis. If entire ecosystems could collapse in a geological instant, could not human societies collapse with them? The survivors might not have left grand cities intact, but they could have carried stories of shining lands and terrible floods. stories that became the foundation of the Atlantis legend. Inuit and other Arctic traditions speak of lands now covered by ice, of migrations from fertile places that no longer exist. South American myths tell of visitors from the sea, bearers of knowledge who arrived after their homeland was lost. Polynesian navigators remember islands swallowed by waves. These accounts may be symbolic, but they may also contain kernels of literal truth, memories passed down through oral tradition long after the landscapes themselves were gone. If Atlantis, or something like it, once lay at the poles, its remains would be buried under kilometers of ice, hidden from even the most determined exploration. Antarctica, particularly, is a realm of secrecy, a continent larger than Europe, almost entirely covered by ice sheets that conceal mountain ranges and valleys. Beneath those sheets lie lakes sealed off for millions of years, untouched ecosystems where anything might be preserved. Could human artifacts be among them? It is speculation, yes, but speculation that arises not from fantasy alone, but from the yawning silence of the geological record. And then there are the maps. The Piri Reis map of 1513, drawn from older sources, famously depicts parts of South America and a coastline resembling Antarctica, drawn centuries before its official discovery. Debate rages over whether the resemblance is coincidence, misinterpretation, or evidence of older cartographic knowledge now lost. Even if misread, the persistence of such anomalies reminds us that fragments of memory often slip into places we do not expect, surfacing centuries later in forms that puzzle us still. The myth of Atlantis, when reframed, becomes less about one island and more about a pattern. Again and again, human memory returns to the idea of a great society lost to water or ice. Whether it was a real city, a continent, or many coastal cultures erased at once, the legend captures the fragility of civilization. It reminds us that the line between flourishing and vanishing is thinner than we imagine, and that Earth itself can erase our greatest achievements in a single moment of upheaval. Standing at the poles today, one feels the weight of this possibility. The Antarctic winds howl across an endless expanse of white, concealing everything below. The Arctic ice shifts and cracks, its surface revealing nothing of the valleys and forests buried beneath. To imagine a civilization under these vaults of ice is to imagine history itself rewritten, to acknowledge that what we know may be only the faintest outline of what has been. And yet, perhaps the truth is even more profound. Perhaps Atlantis is not a place but a mirror, a reflection of the cycles of rise and fall that define all civilizations. Each empire, each culture, each shining city carries within it the seed of disappearance. Atlantis, whether real or imagined, is the reminder that nothing endures forever, and that memory itself is fragile, shifting like coastlines with the tides. The poles remain silent, but silence is not absence. Beneath ice, beneath ocean, beneath myth, there may still lie stories waiting to surface. Atlantis may never be found, or it may appear one day in fragments, walls glimpsed under glaciers, carvings retrieved from drowned coasts, memories brought into light after millennia of silence. Until then, we walk upon a world whose history is deeper than we can fathom, listening for echoes in the ice. The rivers of bone have given way to seas of mystery, and as we turn now toward the forces that reshaped Earth in fire and flood, we carry with us the haunting thought: if Atlantis lies beneath the poles, then our own civilization too is no more secure than theirs. The Earth remembers in silence, and one day it may whisper of us only as another forgotten age. The Earth does not move gently. Though we live as though the ground beneath our feet is eternal, history reminds us that nature has always held the power to reset the course of life in an instant. Volcanoes darken the skies, earthquakes split the land, floods swallow entire valleys, yet nothing strikes with greater suddenness and terror than fire from above. A streak of light across the heavens, a roaring impact, a shock wave that flattens forests and hurls oceans out of their basins. Such events have scarred the earth many times before, and their shadows linger in myth, in geology, and perhaps in the memory of civilizations swept away. The Younger Dryas, that enigmatic return to glacial cold around 12,900 years ago, remains one of the most haunting puzzles in prehistory. Just as the ice sheets were retreating and the earth seemed to be warming, the climate shifted abruptly, plunging much of the world back into a bitter chill. Megafauna that had endured for millennia vanished. Human populations that had begun to gather in larger, more complex groups were scattered and reduced. Entire landscapes were transformed within a single human lifetime. What caused this sudden catastrophe? Theories abound. One hypothesis is the cosmic one, that fragments of a comet or asteroid shattered in the atmosphere, raining fire upon the continents. Evidence of this has been sought in black mats of sediment containing microscopic spheres of melted rock, in traces of platinum rare on Earth's surface, in layers of soot suggesting continent-wide fires. If true, the image is staggering. The sky would have glowed with burning fragments, forests ignited in sheets of flame, animals and humans alike driven before walls of fire and smoke. Rivers would have boiled, skies darkened, and the fragile beginnings of agriculture or settlement erased before they could take root. Others suggest the cause lay beneath the ground and sea rather than above. Vast floods, released when ice dams ruptured, may have poured across continents, reshaping coastlines and erasing entire regions. The glacial meltwaters that carved the scablands of North America speak of floods so immense that they defy imagination. Rivers hundreds of feet high, moving with the force of oceans, sweeping away everything in their path. To those who witnessed it, it would have seemed as though the world itself was drowning, as though the deep had risen to reclaim the land. And still others point to volcanic fury. A massive eruption, perhaps unrecorded, could have filled the skies with ash, reflecting sunlight and plunging the world into cold. Volcanic winters have left their mark elsewhere. The eruption of Toba some 74,000 years ago nearly extinguished humanity, reducing populations to a fraction of their former numbers. If such an eruption struck again during the delicate transition out of the Ice Age, it could explain the sudden chill, the deaths, the extinctions. Whatever the cause, the effect was the same. Destruction on a scale that left deep scars not only on the earth, but on human memory. Flood myths, fire myths, tales of divine punishment and cosmic retribution. They may all be echoes of these cataclysms. When entire valleys drowned and skies rained fire, how else could people explain it but by the will of gods? The deluge becomes both literal and symbolic, a story carried forward in countless traditions. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from the Arctic to Oceania, we find the same motifs: fire, flood, destruction, survival of a chosen few. Myth may not preserve exact history, but it preserves the emotional truth of catastrophe. Archaeological riddles align with this possibility. Sites such as Göbekli Tepe emerged just after the Younger Dryas, as if survivors of upheaval sought to rebuild not only society, but memory itself in stone. Some researchers suggest the carvings at Göbekli Tepe record a cosmic impact, constellations etched as warnings of what fell from the sky. Whether this is true or not, The timing is compelling. As the world emerged from devastation, new expressions of culture and complexity arose, perhaps born from trauma, from the need to anchor meaning in a world that had proven itself violently unstable. Imagine the perspective of those who lived through it. A night sky suddenly filled with streaks of fire, each one growing brighter until the earth shook with thunder. Rivers swelling overnight, carrying trees, animals, and homes into their torrents. Ash falling from the sky like snow, choking lungs, darkening the sun. For a species that had only just begun to settle, to imagine permanence, such events must have been incomprehensible. The world was not steady, not safe. It could turn in an instant, reminding humanity of its fragility. And yet, catastrophe is also catalyst. The end of the Younger Dryas ushered in the Holocene, the relatively stable climate in which agriculture flourished, cities rose, and civilizations expanded. Without the upheaval, perhaps humanity would have continued as scattered bands of foragers. The fire and flood may have nearly erased us, but they also forced us to adapt, to create, to imagine new ways of survival. Destruction and creation are twin forces in Earth's story, and catastrophe has often been the doorway to transformation. The echoes of this truth reverberate in our myths. Fire from the sky becomes punishment for hubris, Zeus hurling thunderbolts, comets seen as omens. Floods become purges, cleansing the earth of corruption. The survivors become the bearers of wisdom, the ancestors of all who follow. These stories are not simply allegories. They are memories reframed, encoded in symbol, because symbol is how memory survives the erosion of detail. In myth, catastrophe is not erased but preserved, transformed into meaning. Even now, the Earth reminds us of this precarious balance. Craters scar the planet from impacts long past. Volcanoes simmer beneath our feet. Oceans rise slowly, then suddenly, reshaping coasts and swallowing islands. The story of fire from the sky and water from the deep is not finished. It is the rhythm of the planet itself. And if our ancestors carried the memory of such destruction for millennia, perhaps it is because they knew it would come again. To study these ancient catastrophes is to confront both fear and humility. Fear, because they remind us that no civilization, however advanced, is immune to the forces of Earth and cosmos. Humility, because they show us that humanity has endured not through power alone, but through resilience, through the ability to carry memory forward, even when nearly all else was lost. Fire and flood may have reset the world, but memory survived, in bones, in carvings, in myths whispered beside the firelight. The echoes of survival tell us this: we are the children of catastrophe. Our very presence is proof that even the most violent upheavals cannot extinguish the spark of human endurance. But they also warn us that the spark is fragile, and that beneath our confidence in permanence lies the same vulnerability our ancestors once faced. As we move from this chapter into the next, the focus will shift from catastrophe to the figures who haunt our myths, giants, gods, and beings whose presence may represent distorted memories of what once lived alongside us. For after fire and flood sweep the earth, memory reshapes itself into legend, and the bones of the vanished become the foundations of gods. Long before paleontology gave names to fossils, before geology explained the ages of stone, humanity stumbled upon the bones of titans. Enormous femurs buried in riverbeds, skulls unearthed by landslides, tusks rising from melting permafrost. These were not anonymous relics to ancient eyes. They were evidence of giants, gods, and monsters who once walked the earth. To stand before a bone larger than any known animal, with no framework of science to explain it, was to feel the presence of beings vast and terrible, ancestors of myth whose echoes still thunder in our stories today. Consider the caves of Europe, where Neanderthal remains mingled with those of cave bears and lions. Early discoverers, centuries later, saw in those massive skulls the heads of cyclopes, the one-eyed giants of Greek legend. The single large cavity at the center of a mammoth skull, where the trunk once anchored, could easily be mistaken for a colossal eye socket. To a shepherd stumbling across such remains in antiquity, what conclusion was more natural than that the earth once held a race of one-eyed giants, fierce and fallen? The bones became stories, and the stories became myth. In the mountains of Asia and the plains of North America, mammoth bones jutted from riverbanks as the earth thawed. To the peoples who found them, they were not remnants of an extinct animal. They were the remains of creatures larger than any alive, perhaps ancestors of gods or monsters. In Siberia, mammoth tusks were thought to belong to underworld beasts that burrowed through the soil, dying when they emerged into sunlight. In Greece, the fossilized bones of giant mammals were taken as proof of the Titans, the primordial beings defeated by Zeus and cast into the earth. Bones became not only relics, but evidence, tangible signs that the myths of giants were not mere tales, but memories rooted in stone. Even in later eras, when civilizations had begun to rise, the fascination with enormous bones persisted. Roman authors wrote of giant skeletons unearthed in distant provinces, attributing them to heroes of old. Medieval chronicles speak of monstrous femurs found in caves, believed to belong to biblical giants such as the Nephilim. In every case, the discovery of a fossil was not a scientific curiosity. It was a revelation, a message from the deep past confirming what stories had long insisted, that the earth was once ruled by beings far greater than humankind. The universality of giant myths suggests a deeper origin. The Norse spoke of frost giants, Jotnar, who battled the gods in endless struggle. The Irish told of Fomorians, monstrous beings banished by divine heroes. Native American traditions recall races of giant hunters who roamed before the coming of their peoples. In the Bible, the Nephilim are described as mighty men of old, offspring of divine beings and mortals towering over humanity. Again and again, across continents, cultures spoke of beings taller, stronger, and older than ourselves. Were these purely symbolic tales or distorted echoes of encounters with other hominin species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, whose bones and memories lingered in the margins of early human experience? Archaeology reveals that for tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens did not walk the earth alone. Neanderthals, robust and powerful, thrived in Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans, known to us only through fragments of bone and DNA, left their genetic mark across Asia and Oceania. Even the diminutive Homo floresiensis, the hobbit, survived on Indonesian islands until surprisingly recent times. To early humans, these cousins may have appeared as giants or monsters, different enough to inspire awe, familiar enough to be remembered as kin. Over time, as they vanished, their memory may have transformed into myth, preserved not as accurate description, but as story. The gods and giants who once walked beside us, but the bones themselves, silent, immovable, kept the stories alive. A massive femur discovered in a field became a relic of a fallen giant. A tooth the size of a fist, belonging to a mastodon, was explained as the molar of a god. Without science to guide interpretation, imagination filled the void. and imagination drew upon the need for meaning. To believe that gods and giants once lived was to affirm that the present was part of a much larger drama, a cosmic struggle written into the very earth. Even today, the awe remains. Standing in a museum before the skeleton of a mammoth or the fossilized jaw of a giant ground sloth, one feels a shiver of recognition. These are not simply extinct animals. They are reminders that the world once belonged to beings larger, stronger, stranger than us. To our ancestors, who stumbled upon such bones without context, the impression must have been overwhelming. No wonder they saw gods in their shape, giants in their magnitude, and monsters in their silence. The interplay of myth and bone also shaped ritual. Some ancient cultures revered fossils as talismans, carrying them as charms or burying them with the dead. Others built legends around specific sites where large bones were common. The Greeks spoke of battles between gods and giants on plains littered with fossil remains. Indigenous traditions linked fossil beds with the deeds of spirits or ancestral beings. Fossils were not inert objects. They were bridges between the living and the mythic past, confirmations that the stories whispered around the fire were grounded in reality, however distorted. The idea of giants persists not only in folklore, but in the architecture of ancient monuments. Megalithic structures, Stonehenge, the Moai of Easter Island, the pyramids of Egypt, were often explained as the work of giants, for who else could move such stones? The scale of the monuments matched the scale of the myths. Giants became both explanation and symbol. Explanation for what seemed impossible by human hands, symbol of the lost greatness of earlier ages. Yet behind the myths lies a deeper truth. The bones of vanished animals and kin remind us that humanity has never been alone, that the earth was once shared with creatures whose presence shaped our imagination. When we told stories of giants, perhaps we were telling stories of memory itself, of beings who were real, but became more powerful in the retelling. Myth is not falsehood. It is memory refracted through symbol. The bones confirm what the stories already knew, that the world was once other than it is now, inhabited by forms both wondrous and terrifying. And so, the bones of gods and giants remind us of the fragile line between memory and myth, between history and imagination. They are echoes of encounters lost to time, transformed into legends that still haunt our collective imagination. To walk among fossil beds today is to feel what our ancestors felt, the weight of presence in absence, the awe of standing in the shadow of beings greater than ourselves. But bones also ask questions. If our ancestors mistook fossils for giants, what might we mistake today? If we, with our science, still feel awe before the bones of vanished creatures, how much greater must their impact have been on those who saw in them the evidence of gods? And if myths of giants are rooted in memory, then what other myths of watchers, of star beings, of lost cities might also carry fragments of truth hidden within their symbols? The bones lie silent, yet they speak in the language of myth. They tell us that the earth remembers more than we can know, that our ancestors did not invent their stories from nothing, but from encounters with remnants of worlds we can barely imagine. Giants may never have walked exactly as the myths describe, but in a sense, they did. Through the bones that lay beneath the soil, through the cousins we once knew, through the awe that shaped our earliest attempts to understand the past. And as the bones of giants blur into the myths of gods, we begin to see another pattern emerging, the presence of beings not entirely human, yet deeply entwined with our origin stories. Watchers, teachers, guardians, figures who appear in traditions across the world, offering knowledge that seems premature for its time. Were they only symbols of human imagination, or do they represent something stranger? A mystery that reaches beyond history into the unknown. Across cultures and continents, there is a curious pattern in the stories humanity has preserved. Again and again, we find accounts of beings who were not quite gods, but not quite men. Figures who came from above or emerged from the earth, luminous in presence, vast in knowledge, shaping the destinies of those they encountered. They appear as teachers, guardians, or sometimes as silent witnesses, always existing at the edges of comprehension. They are called watchers, star people, messengers of the sky. Whether born of imagination or of some encounter now lost to history, their echoes remain persistent, reverberating through oral tradition, sacred text, and myth. In the ancient Near East, the Book of Enoch tells of the Watchers, beings who descended to Earth, teaching humans arts and crafts, knowledge of the stars, secrets of metallurgy and medicine. These Watchers were at once revered and feared, for their gifts carried both blessing and ruin. In Mesopotamian tradition, sages known as the Apkallu emerged from the waters, half fish, half man, bearers of wisdom from the gods. In the Americas, the Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs, a feathered serpent deity, was remembered as a civilizing force who taught agriculture, law, and the calendar. The Polynesian Maui, the Greek Prometheus, the Egyptian Thoth, all play similar roles, bringers of knowledge, figures who stand between humanity and the vast unknown, shaping us in ways we cannot fully explain. What unites these myths is not their detail, but their motif: knowledge arriving too soon. Humanity is portrayed as receiving wisdom beyond its stage of development, gifts that ignite leaps in culture, technology, and belief. Were these simply stories to explain the origins of skills that seemed miraculous to early societies? Or do they reflect something stranger? Encounters with others, whether human, hominin, or something else, who guided us during fragile beginnings. The archaeological record stirs the imagination. Consider the great monuments aligned with celestial bodies, Stonehenge marking solstices, the pyramids of Giza aligned to Orion's belt, the megaliths of Nabta Playa in the Sahara, thousands of years older than Stonehenge, marking the rising of stars. In South America, the Nazca lines stretching across the desert floor, their vast geoglyphs visible only from the air. In Asia, the temples of Angkor Wat aligned to the equinox. These are not accidents. They are deliberate alignments of stone and earth with the heavens above, created by people whose survival already demanded immense daily labor. How, then, did they possess such precise astronomical knowledge? Did they discover it themselves through observation, or was it passed to them by teachers remembered later as watchers? Skepticism insists that human ingenuity is explanation enough. Given time, observation, and necessity, early peoples could track the stars, mark the seasons, and build in alignment. Yet the universality of this impulse, the drive to mirror heaven upon earth, suggests something more profound. Perhaps the Watchers were not literal beings but the stars themselves, embodiments of order in the chaos of the sky, guiding humanity not through physical presence, but through inspiration. Perhaps the act of aligning stone with star was itself a dialogue with the Watchers, a way of acknowledging that human life was watched over by powers vast and distant. Still, questions remain. Why do so many myths describe these Watchers as luminous, radiant, descending from above? Why do they so often bear knowledge far beyond subsistence, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, law? And why do these motifs appear even among cultures separated by oceans, with no contact for millennia? Either human imagination independently arrived at the same figures, or these stories carry memories older than we realize, rooted in a common origin before humanity scattered across the continents. The idea of the Watchers forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge. Were they real beings? Other species who shared the earth with us? Could the memory of Neanderthals or Denisovans, larger and stronger than Homo sapiens, have transformed into stories of teachers or giants? Or did some human cultures, more advanced than we yet realize, collapse in catastrophe, leaving only the faint memory of their wisdom passed to survivors? In this view, the Watchers may have been no more than fellow humans, remnants of civilizations erased by flood or fire, remembered later as something greater than human because their knowledge seemed impossibly advanced. But the myths resist such reduction. Again and again, they describe beings who do not merely teach survival, but shape destiny. They appear suddenly, bring knowledge, then vanish, leaving humanity to carry their gifts forward. They are liminal, living at the threshold of history, haunting the border between memory and imagination. They feel less like neighbors and more like archetypes, symbols of humanity's first awareness that it was not alone. Perhaps the Watchers are not beings at all, but the embodiment of human consciousness awakening. When early humans looked at the stars and began to imagine patterns, when they carved calendars into bone and raised stones toward the heavens, they crossed a threshold into abstraction, into culture, into civilization. The Watchers may be the mythic face of this awakening, the personification of a force within ourselves, the sudden leap into meaning, into memory, into story. Yet there remains an unsettling possibility. If the Watchers were real, if they were others who walked beside us and then vanished, what does that say about our history? Were they species we did not recognize? Perhaps even civilizations erased from the record? Did humanity inherit knowledge, fragments of wisdom, from a source we cannot name? Or were they something beyond biology, presences we can only gesture toward with myth? Cosmic, archetypal, perhaps even something we would call divine? Standing in the ruins of ancient temples, aligned so perfectly to stars, it is difficult not to feel their presence. The stones hum with precision. The geometry speaks of intention. To imagine these places built only for agriculture or ritual feels insufficient. They are messages carved into earth itself, as if humanity was speaking to the sky, or answering a call from it. The Watchers remain elusive, but their echoes are written into architecture, into myth, into the shared impulse to connect heaven and earth. And so, the Watchers haunt us still. They appear in stories of angels, in tales of star people, in modern visions of luminous beings who arrive unbidden. Whether symbolic or real, they represent the same truth, that humanity has always felt observed, guided, shaped by presences beyond comprehension. They remind us that our story may not be solely our own, that the knowledge we carry might have been seeded by forces older, stranger, or more mysterious than we can imagine. As we leave the Watchers behind, we step into an even larger mystery, the memory of the earth itself. For beyond myths of beings and civilizations lies the question of whether the planet itself carries cycles of forgetting and renewal, resets written into stone and magnetism, rhythms so vast that we are only beginning to hear their pulse. The earth remembers, though not in the way we do. Human memory is fragile, prone to distortion, eroded by the passing of years. The planet's memory, by contrast, is etched into stone, ice, and magnetic fields. It speaks in layers of sediment, in rings of trees, in the shifting orientation of iron particles frozen in volcanic rock. If we know how to read it, the Earth reveals a story that stretches back billions of years, a story of upheaval and renewal, of cycles that rise and fall like breaths drawn across geological time. And within that record lie riddles, patterns that suggest the history of humanity may be less unique, less secure than we have imagined. The continents themselves are palimpsests of memory. Tectonic plates grind against one another. Mountains rise, valleys collapse, oceans open and close. Yet within this restless shifting, the Earth preserves traces of former worlds. Fossils entombed in limestone reveal oceans where deserts now stand. Layers of volcanic ash mark moments when skies darkened, climates shifted, and species vanished. Each stratum is a page in the planet's diary, though written in a language of minerals and voids rather than words. To the trained eye, cliffs and cores are not static. They are stories frozen in place, awaiting interpretation. One of the most haunting aspects of this record is its rhythm. Extinction is not random. It comes in waves. Every so often, the Earth convulses with catastrophe. Impacts from space, volcanic supereruptions, sudden shifts in climate. Life flourishes, then falters, then flourishes again, as though existence itself is caught in cycles of forgetting and renewal. The Permian extinction, the Cretaceous asteroid, the Toba eruption, the Younger Dryas, all remind us that stability is an illusion. The Earth keeps time not by seasons or centuries, but by pulses of destruction and rebirth. Humanity's chapter is but one beat in a rhythm that has played for eons. Even the magnetic field carries memory. As molten iron churns in the planet's core, the magnetic poles wander and sometimes reverse. In rocks formed during these shifts, iron particles lock into alignment, preserving a record of the field's orientation at the moment of cooling. These magnetic reversals, scattered across millions of years, are like the tick marks of a cosmic clock, reminding us that even the invisible forces we rely on, compasses, shields against solar wind, are impermanent. What would reversal have meant to ancient humans had they been aware of it? A sky that shimmered with auroras, compasses that spun senselessly, perhaps even subtle changes in climate and radiation. Could such events be the hidden origin of myths about cosmic upheavals, ages of chaos when the world itself seemed to turn upside down? Ice, too, remembers. In Greenland and Antarctica, cores drilled deep into the frozen sheets reveal annual layers, each one preserving the chemistry of ancient atmospheres. Within them we read the story of volcanic winters, of sudden warming and cooling, of carbon levels rising and falling long before humans altered them. In their clarity, these ice records are voices of time itself, speaking of the fragility of climates and the speed with which they can transform. The Younger Dryas, once again, is written plainly in the layers. A sudden plunge into cold, a recovery just as sudden. Humanity's fate has always been tethered to such shifts, for our bodies and cultures thrive only in narrow bands of stability. But the most tantalizing question is whether these records preserve more than climate and catastrophe. Could the Earth, in its deep rhythms, hold memory of civilizations now erased? Not in bones or ruins, but in anomalies, spikes of carbon, traces of radiation, chemical signatures that do not fit the known cycles. Some scientists have posed what they call the Silurian hypothesis. If an advanced civilization had risen millions of years ago, would we find evidence of it today? Their answer is sobering. Nearly all physical traces would be gone, eroded, recycled by tectonics, buried beyond reach. Yet the Earth might still remember in its chemistry, in sudden anomalies that cannot be explained by natural processes. The riddle lingers. What if we are not the first? Cosmic riddles compound the mystery. The solar system moves not in stillness, but through galactic space, passing through clouds of radiation, crossing arms of the Milky Way, subject to forces invisible to us. Some researchers have suggested that periodic extinctions may correlate with these cosmic journeys, as the Earth moves through regions of higher cometary debris or stronger radiation. The great impacts that reset life's trajectory may not be random. They may be the consequence of our planet's larger voyage through the galaxy. If so, then our history is not only terrestrial, but cosmic, shaped by rhythms that dwarf imagination. Myths echo this in strange ways. Stories of ages of fire, of floods, of skies darkened and stars falling, may be cultural memories of these cosmic events. To the peoples who witnessed meteors streak across the sky or comets blaze for months overhead, the heavens themselves must have seemed alive, watchful, even wrathful. Stars were not distant suns. They were eyes, guardians, or portents. In their shifting and their falling, humans saw not chance but destiny. The cosmic riddles of geology may thus be mirrored in the riddles of myth, each interpreting the same events through different languages, one in stone, one in story. And still, the Earth's memory humbles us. Civilizations rise with confidence, believing their monuments will endure forever. Yet time wears away even the greatest stone. Forests reclaim cities, sand buries temples, seas consume coasts. After a few thousand years, ruins crumble. After a few million, almost nothing remains. The geological record is merciless. It preserves catastrophe better than culture, extinction more clearly than achievement. If humanity were to vanish tomorrow, what would remain of us in 10 million years? A thin layer of plastic polymers, a spike in carbon dioxide, traces of radioactive isotopes. Perhaps in some future age, another intelligence might puzzle over these anomalies, wondering whether they represent the echo of a forgotten civilization. The Earth is not sentimental. It remembers only what is preserved by chance. And yet, in its silence, it forces us to confront the fragility of our presence. We are not the first beings to walk here, and we may not be the last. The cycles of destruction and renewal that shaped the dinosaurs, the mammoths, the Neanderthals, may one day shape us too. The riddles of geology are warnings written in stone. Nothing lasts, not even the world as we know it. Still, there is awe in this realization. To know that the Earth keeps memory in stone and ice, that it whispers of catastrophes and rebirths, is to glimpse our place in a vast continuum. We are part of a rhythm that extends far beyond us, a symphony of destruction and creation in which our species is but a fleeting note. Yet even fleeting notes matter, for they shape the whole. If the Earth remembers us only in traces, perhaps it is enough that we have left echoes in story, in art, in the fragile flame of culture carried forward. The cosmic riddles remain unsolved. Were there others before us? Will there be others after us? Is humanity the first to look at the stars and wonder, or simply the most recent? The Earth does not answer directly, but in its cycles and anomalies, it leaves space for mystery. And it is in that mystery that awe arises, the sense that our story is both smaller and greater than we imagine. Smaller, because we are not immune to the forces that shaped ages before us. Greater, because we are aware of it, conscious enough to read the memory of the planet and to wonder at its riddles. As we stand upon this threshold, listening to the whispers in stone and ice, we prepare for the final horizon. For beyond Earth's memory, lies the greater silence of the cosmos, the vast space in which planets, stars, and galaxies turn without heed to our presence. To move into that silence is to confront not only the riddles of our past, but the question of whether we, too, are part of a story written across the stars. There is a moment, standing beneath the night sky far from the glare of cities, when the human heart falters. The dome of stars stretches above in endless silence, the Milky Way spilling across the heavens like a river of fire frozen in time. Each point of light is a sun, each sun perhaps surrounded by worlds, and the sheer enormity of it presses down with the weight of infinity. For our ancestors huddled around fires, this vision was both comfort and terror. For us, armed with telescopes and science, it is no less staggering. The horizon of our origins does not end at the edges of ice, nor even in the geological memory of the Earth. It extends outward into the cosmos itself, into questions as vast as the void. Where did we come from, and are we truly alone? Humanity has always sought to place itself in a story larger than itself. The myths of watchers, giants, and lost civilizations speak not only of what may have been, but of a yearning for meaning beyond survival. When we gaze at the stars, that yearning sharpens into both hope and dread. The cosmos is a mirror in which we search for kinship, for signs that intelligence has blossomed elsewhere. And yet, despite decades of listening, the silence remains. The paradox is cruel. In a galaxy of billions of suns, the absence of voices is deafening. If life is common, why have we not heard it? If intelligence arises often, why has it not reached us? The horizon of our origins is bound up with this paradox, the question of whether we are unique or merely one note in a cosmic symphony we cannot yet hear. Some argue that silence itself is the answer, that civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a shore, each erased before they can spread beyond their cradle. The Earth's own record supports this. Cataclysm is not the exception, but the rule. If we nearly vanished with the eruption of Toba, if the younger Dryas scattered us to the brink, why should we assume others fare better? Perhaps the silence of the stars is not absence, but memory, an echo of countless civilizations that rose, dreamed, and fell before their voices could travel far. In this view, we may not be alone, but we may be among the rare few who stand long enough to wonder. Others imagine that the silence conceals presence, that we are observed, perhaps even guided, by forces we do not comprehend. Myths of watchers and messengers may be reflections of this suspicion, encoded in story long before the question was framed in scientific terms. To those who first raised their eyes to the night sky, the stars were not mute. They were eyes, fires, dwellings of gods. Today, we listen for radio signals, scan for exoplanets, model atmospheres for traces of oxygen and methane. Our tools have changed, but the impulse is the same: to know if the horizon of our origins extends beyond this planet, to find if others share the silence with us. Yet perhaps the most humbling possibility is that intelligence itself is fleeting, a spark rather than a flame. Civilizations may bloom and die in cycles so brief that the galaxy hardly notices. If so, then our story is precarious, balanced on the knife's edge of survival. The same fire from the sky, the same waters from the deep, the same cycles of climate and catastrophe that nearly erased us once may come again. We are not outside the rhythms of the earth. We are bound to them, even as we stretch toward the stars. To see ourselves in this light is not despair, but perspective. To understand that our horizon is fragile, but also precious. The horizon of our origins is not only outward, but inward. The DNA in our cells carries memories of encounters with Neanderthals and Denisovans, whispers of other species entwined with ours. The myths we tell carry memories of firelit nights, of floods and giants, of beings who watched and guided. The stones and bones beneath our feet preserve echoes of forgotten ages. In all of this, we see that our story is not linear, but layered, woven from survival, catastrophe, and imagination. To understand our origins is to accept that we are both fragile animals and vessels of memory, both products of Earth and dreamers of cosmos. And still, the question remains, are we the first? The geological riddles remind us how little the Earth preserves of civilizations. If an earlier intelligence walked this world millions of years ago, their traces would be faint, buried, erased. And if they looked to the stars as we do now, perhaps they too wondered whether they were alone, whether they were first, whether others would follow. The silence offers no answer. Yet within that silence is space for awe, for humility, for the possibility that we are part of a story larger than any we can imagine. Perhaps this is why the myth of Atlantis endures, why tales of watchers persist, why we carve stones to mirror the stars. We sense that the horizon of our origins does not end with us, that memory extends beyond the reach of any one civilization. Whether or not others came before, whether or not others exist now, the longing itself is proof that we belong to something greater. Our awareness, our ability to ask, is itself part of the horizon. We are the Earth becoming conscious of its own story, the cosmos gazing back upon itself through human eyes. To stand at the horizon is to face both possibility and responsibility. If we are alone, then we are the only voice of consciousness in a galaxy of silence. If we are not, then we are part of a community we cannot yet see. In either case, the weight is immense. For our ancestors, survival meant fire in the night, food in the belly, stories to carry hope. For us, survival may mean safeguarding a fragile planet, listening to the stars, and ensuring that our voice does not vanish before it can be heard. The horizon stretches outward without end. We will never reach its edge, for each discovery only opens new questions. Each answer reveals deeper mysteries. But perhaps this is the point. The horizon of our origins is not a destination, but a direction, a call to keep moving, keep seeking, keep remembering. In the silence of the poles, in the bones of giants, in the memory of the Earth, and in the vastness of the cosmos, we are reminded that we are part of a story that has no final chapter, only unfolding pages. So we return to the fire, the river, the stars. We listen to the echoes in stone and myth. We gaze at the sky as our ancestors once did, and we feel the same awe, the same trembling recognition that we are both fleeting and eternal. The horizon of our origins is not behind us, nor before us, but all around us, woven into the ice, the water, the bones, the myths, the galaxies that shimmer like embers in the night. And as we step into that horizon, one truth lingers above all. We are not the end of the story, but its continuation. Whether we are the first or only the latest, our task is the same: to endure, to remember, to wonder, to keep the flame alive against the endless night, carrying it forward into a future we cannot yet see, where perhaps others will one day listen for our echoes as we now listen for theirs.